Left to die, the escape pod crashed hard. Flames lit up the sky as metal tore through the trees. Smoke rose into the alien air. The ground shook for a moment. Then everything was quiet. Inside the wreckage, a man opened his eyes. His head throbbed. Blood ran down his cheek. His name was Jack Riker, and he had just been left to die. He coughed and pulled himself out of the broken pod. Around him was nothing but strange, purple trees and a green sky. He looked up. No ships, no stars he recognized. Just clouds moving fast over twin suns. Jack had been a soldier. A good one. Loyal. Brave. But that didn't matter anymore. 2 weeks ago, he was fighting for Earth's army. Then, suddenly, they'd blamed him for a mission gone wrong. A secret mission. He was accused of betrayal, though he had done nothing wrong. No one believed him. Or maybe, no one wanted to believe him. He was court-martialed in secret. No trial. No lawyer. Just lies. Then came the punishment. Exile to planet 501Z. No return. No contact. Let the planet handle him. It wasn't a prison. It was worse. It was a death sentence. Jack took a deep breath. The air smelled strange, but it was breathable. He limped through the jungle, trying to find shelter. His suit was torn, and one leg hurt badly. He used a broken branch to walk. Hours passed. The forest was full of odd sounds. Birds that didn't look like birds. Trees that moved slightly, even when there was no wind. Shadows flickered. Eyes watched. He found a small cave by sunset. Cold and tired, he crawled inside and wrapped himself in a thermal blanket from the pod. His mind raced. They wanted me dead, he whispered to himself. They just didn't want to pull the trigger. His stomach growled. He had only one food pack. Water was even worse. He'd have to find some tomorrow. That night, he couldn't sleep. There were footsteps outside the cave. Slow, heavy. He held his breath. Something was out there. Something big. The sound stopped. A growl echoed in the night, deep, low, and close. Then silence. Jack waited, holding a metal rod as a weapon. Hours passed. Nothing came in. When the morning light broke through the trees, Jack stepped outside. He looked around carefully. That's when he saw the footprints. They were huge, at least 3 times the size of his boot. 4 toes. Clawed. The prints led from the trees to his cave. And then away again. Something had come right up to him in the night. And left. Why? Jack followed the tracks for a while, but they vanished into thick mud. He returned to the pod wreckage to gather whatever he could. Some tools, broken parts, and a small scanner. The scanner blinked red. Life forms, many of them, all around the jungle. But it couldn't identify them. Too alien, too dangerous. He built a small wall of branches in front of the cave that night, trying to feel safe. He couldn't stop thinking about the creature that had visited him. Was it hunting him, or watching? As the sun set again, Jack sat near the cave entrance, fire flickering, metal rod in hand. Then he heard it again. A low growl, not angry, not hostile. He stood, peering into the dark. Leaves moved. Something big was standing just outside the firelight. He could feel it watching him. Then it dropped something on the ground. Meat. Raw. Freshly killed. Jack froze. The creature had brought him food. Before he could say a word, the shape disappeared back into the trees, silent like a ghost. Jack stared at the meat, his heart pounding. Why would a monster feed him? Was it a game? Was it a warning? Or was it something else? The beast in the dark. Jack stared at the raw meat lying near the edge of his campfire. It was big, bigger than anything he'd ever seen back on Earth. The flesh was deep red, with dark blue veins running through it. It was still warm, freshly killed. But what really made Jack's skin crawl was the fact that it had been placed there. Carefully, like a gift. By something. intelligent. Jack's hands trembled as he picked it up. He checked it with his scanner. Safe to cook, possibly safe to eat. The scanner beeped uncertainly. The creature that brought it clearly knew more about this planet than he did. He grilled the meat slowly over the fire, the juices sizzling. He hadn't eaten real food in days. The food pack from the pod was gone. His stomach growled louder than the jungle. He looked out into the trees while chewing the first bite. "Why are you helping me?" he whispered to the darkness. No answer. But Jack had a feeling he was still being watched. The next morning, Jack woke to strange sounds. Clicking, crunching, soft breathing. He looked outside the cave and saw something that made him freeze. Just a few feet away, a massive lizard-like predator was chewing on something. It looked like another animal. The thing's eyes were yellow, and its body was armored with scales. It hadn't seen him yet. Jack slowly picked up a rock, just as he was about to throw it to distract the creature. Crack! The trees to the right snapped like matchsticks. A giant shadow moved in fast. The armored lizard turned, too late. A blur of black fur and long arms slammed into it. Teeth flashed. Claws ripped through scale and bone. The predator didn't even have time to scream. Within seconds, it was over. Blood soaked the leaves. And the monster stood tall. It was massive, almost 10 feet high, with dark fur, long limbs, and glowing silver eyes. Muscles rippled under its skin. Its face was not quite human, not quite animal either. It looked toward Jack. For a moment, man and beast stared at each other. Then the creature dropped the dead predator in front of the cave. A gift. Again. Jack's heart was racing, but strangely, he wasn't afraid. The monster wasn't attacking him. In fact, it was protecting him. For the next few days, the pattern continued. Every evening, the creature returned with food. It never came too close, never entered the cave, but it was always watching, always near. Jack started leaving things outside the cave too. Shiny tools, scraps of metal, broken tech from his pod. Little offerings. He didn't know why. It just felt right. Then one day, when Jack woke up, he found something new. Beside the usual meat, there was a small, smooth stone. It had strange markings on it. Symbols. It looked almost like writing. Jack held it carefully. He scanned it. The scanner couldn't translate it, but the readings were odd. The stone had energy inside it, ancient but still active. He looked into the jungle and whispered, "What are you?" Later that night, as Jack sat by his fire, he saw movement again. The creature appeared, slowly, silently. This time, it didn't stay hidden. It stepped closer, into the firelight. Jack stood, ready to run if needed. But the beast just tilted its head, watching him with calm, intelligent eyes. Jack lowered his weapon. "Do you understand me?" he asked softly. The creature blinked. Then, to Jack's shock, it nodded. Jack's breath caught in his throat. "You're not just some animal." The creature took another step closer. It knelt and placed a giant, clawed hand flat on the ground, a sign of peace. Jack did the same. Their hands didn't touch, but they were close. The air between them felt heavy, powerful, like a silent agreement had just been made. From that night on, Jack gave the creature a name. Gore. Over the following days, Gore stayed nearby. Jack never felt alone anymore. And strangely, he didn't feel afraid either. He started talking to Gore like a friend, even if the creature didn't speak back. Sometimes, he thought Gore understood. Sometimes, he was sure of it. They hunted together. Gore taught Jack how to spot danger, how to move quietly, how to listen to the forest. Jack showed Gore how to use tools, how to signal with hand gestures. It was slow, careful, but trust was growing between them. One night, a terrible storm hit the jungle. Lightning ripped across the sky. The cave began to flood. Trees fell in the wind. Jack tried to move his supplies to higher ground, but a falling branch hit him hard. He cried out in pain. His leg twisted, stuck. From the rain and smoke, Gore came running. The monster, the bond. The days passed. Jack's leg healed slowly, but he could walk again, with Gore's help. The creature stayed by his side, quiet but watchful, never more than a few steps away. It was like having a silent bodyguard, a protector, a friend. Jack didn't know what kind of creature Gore was. There was nothing in the Galactic database about his species. The scanner couldn't even read his body temperature, but what mattered was clear. Gore wasn't just wild. He was loyal. One morning, Jack woke up to find Gore building something outside the cave, not with claws or brute force, but with thought. The creature was stacking stones in a perfect circle, lining them with leaves. In the center, he placed a sharp metal piece Jack had left out 2 days before. Jack walked over, curious. Gore stepped back, letting him look. It wasn't random. It was a trap, a clever one. Jack smiled. "You learn fast, big guy." Gore blinked slowly. That day, Jack made a decision. If they were going to survive together, they needed to trust each other completely. No fear, no guessing. He started teaching Gore. At first, it was simple things. Hand signals, basic movements. Stop, follow, hide. Gore learned faster than Jack expected, almost like he had done it before. They trained every day. Jack would point, gesture, or speak, and Gore would respond perfectly. By the end of the week, Gore could follow Jack's signals without hesitation. He could climb, ambush, even fetch supplies from the pod wreckage. He was quiet, focused, deadly when needed. Jack was amazed. He had trained soldiers before, but never like this. "You're not just a monster," he told Gore one night. "You're a soldier." As the bond between them grew, Jack started noticing more strange things. Gore didn't just learn fast. He understood emotions. When Jack was angry, Gore kept his distance. When Jack was in pain, Gore sat close. Once, when Jack woke from a nightmare, screaming, sweating, Gore let out a soft growl, like a lullaby. Low, calm, soothing. Jack stared at the creature in the dark. "You've seen war, haven't you?" he whispered. "You've seen more than I can imagine." Gore didn't reply. But in that moment, Jack didn't need words. Later, while exploring deeper into the jungle, Jack found something strange. A piece of metal. Old. Buried under leaves. He pulled it out, and his heart skipped a beat. It was a part of a military drone. Earth design. Scared. Broken. Forgotten. Jack cleaned it and looked around. The trees nearby were burned. The ground was cracked. This area had seen battle. He scanned further and found more parts. Not just from Earth. From other species too. Weapons. Armor. Bones. This wasn't just a jungle. It was a graveyard. And in the center of it all, Jack found something that made his skin crawl. A giant metal collar. Rusted. Covered in old blood. It was built for something big, something like Gore. Jack picked it up slowly. There was a number printed on it. Subject 09X status. Uncontrollable. Terminated. His hands tightened. Gore stepped forward, looking at the collar. His eyes darkened. His breath grew heavy. He remembered. That night, Jack couldn't sleep. He sat by the fire, turning the collar over in his hands. Gore was once a prisoner. A weapon. Maybe part of some secret army project. Created or captured. Trained to kill. Then, discarded. Just like Jack. Both of them had been used. Then thrown away. Jack looked at Gore, who was curled up nearby, his massive body rising and falling with slow breaths. "I know what they did to you," Jack said quietly. "They did it to me too." For the first time, Gore looked directly into his eyes. Something passed between them, deeper than words, deeper than species or language. A shared pain, a silent promise. From that day on, their bond became stronger. Jack no longer saw Gore as a beast. He saw him as a brother. They trained together like elite soldiers, moved like shadows in the trees, hunted with deadly precision. One day, Jack found a broken screen from the pod. He fixed it using parts from the drone wreckage. It wasn't much, but he could now access messages from orbit. He tried sending a signal, short range only. Days passed. Nothing. Then, one morning, the screen blinked. Incoming transmission. Jack's heart raced. He opened it. The face that appeared made his blood boil. It was General Klein, the man who had betrayed him, the one who ordered Jack's exile. Recon team approaching Zone 500 and 1Z full sweep. No survivors. Jack stood in silence. He wasn't forgotten. They were coming back. Not to rescue him, but to kill him properly this time. He turned to Gore, who watched him calmly. "They're coming," Jack said. Gore's eyes narrowed. His claws flexed. "But this time," Jack whispered, "we're ready." Training the monster. The jungle was quiet. Too quiet. Jack stood on a high ridge, looking down at the forest below. His breath was slow, controlled. In his hand, he held a small device, a motion sensor he had rebuilt using drone parts. The green light on it blinked softly. Beside him, crouched like a shadow, was Gore. The message was clear. The soldiers were coming. Earth's military hadn't forgotten him after all. They were sending a cleanup team to finish what the exile started. Jack smiled bitterly. "They think I'm alone out here," he muttered. Gore growled softly, as if he understood. "They have no idea." For the first time since his crash, Jack had a clear mission. Prepare, train, survive, win. And he wasn't doing it alone. He had Gore. The monster wasn't just muscle. He was smart, almost too smart. Jack had seen soldiers learn slower than him. So he turned the jungle into a training ground. Day after day, Jack drilled Gore with everything he knew from military tactics. Not just how to fight, but how to think in battle. He built dummies out of vines and old armor. Gore tore them apart in seconds. He taught ambush tactics: hide, wait, strike. Gore moved like wind between the trees. He created sound signals, whistles, clicks, hand gestures. Gore followed everyone perfectly. In just 1 week, Gore became more than a creature. He became a weapon, a silent, deadly shadow. Jack watched him train, sweat running down his neck. "He's not a monster," Jack whispered one night. "He's a soldier they couldn't control." And they threw him away, just like they did to me. One afternoon, Jack and Gore discovered something deep in the jungle, a ruined research facility hidden beneath overgrown vines. The building was half collapsed. Inside were broken computers, shattered screens, and dried blood stains. The walls were scorched by old fire. Jack searched the lab for hours. In a sealed chamber, he found something that made his stomach twist. Files, dozens of them. Each one had a photo. Each one showed a creature like Gore. Labeled Pro-GCTERA Tamer. Genetic hybrid units. Classified. Jack scrolled through file after file. The photos showed monsters. Taller, smaller, winged, horned. Some alive. Most marked as terminated. Then he found one marked. Subject 09X. Status. Escaped. Jack's hands trembled as he opened the file. There was a video log. He played it. The screen showed a metal room. A scientist stood beside a cage. Inside the cage was Gore. Younger, smaller, but the same glowing eyes. The scientist spoke nervously. Subject 09X shows extreme learning speed. Responds to commands. Adapts faster than expected. Displays emotional reaction to trainers. The video cut to a new clip. Another scientist. Different cage. Louder alarms in the background. Subject 09X has turned on handlers. Refuses to obey. Killed 2 guards protecting a wounded technician. Another cut. He only responds to the one he trusts. Just one. Final entry. We tried to break him. It didn't work. We failed. If you find this, don't try to control him. You can only earn him. The video ended. Jack stared at the screen for a long time. So Gore was created, trained, tested, pushed. And when he refused to be a tool, they locked him up. They branded him dangerous. They hunted him like an animal. And still, Gore had protected Jack. Not because he was ordered to, but because he chose to. That night, Jack looked at Gore across the fire. You were their best weapon, he said quietly, but they didn't understand you. Gore said nothing, just stared at the flames. They will now, Jack added, because you don't obey them. You obey me. Gore blinked once, slowly, a silent agreement. The next morning, Jack and Gore started building traps, real ones. Pitfalls lined with sharp branches, net snares made from vine and metal wire, pressure plates made from jungle stones and tech fragments, smoke bombs from plant oils. They turned the jungle into a fortress. Every path, every hill, every clearing, mapped and trapped. Jack even found old drone blasters and rigged them with motion sensors. If the soldiers came looking, they would never leave. 2 days later, the scanner lit up again. Blip, blip, multiple signals. Coming closer. Jack climbed a tree and looked through the leaves with a scope. A gunship hovered in the sky. Below it, 6 armored soldiers moved through the trees. They wore Earth insignias. Advanced gear, full helmets. But Jack could see it in their body language. They were confident. Too confident. They had no idea what waited for them. He turned to Gore and gave a short signal. Gore vanished into the trees like smoke. It was time. The hunter had become the prey. The signal. The jungle held its breath. Birds stopped singing. Wind stopped blowing. The trees stood still as shadows moved beneath their branches. Jack was one of those shadows now. He crouched low behind a moss-covered log, his scope locked on the 6 soldiers marching through the brush. They were careful, scanning the area with high-tech visors and motion sensors. But they didn't see the small tripwire stretched across the trail ahead. Jack whispered into the comlink he had built from scraps, now clipped to his collar. Team Alpha is entering Trap Zone 1. In the treetops above, something moved. Gore, waiting, watching. Jack exhaled. Let's begin. The soldiers stepped forward, one after another. Suddenly, snap, a spike trap launched from the side, hitting the lead soldier's arm. He shouted in pain as his weapon dropped. Before he could reach for it, a heavy net slammed down from above, pinning 2 of them to the ground. Ambush. One of them yelled. We're under attack. Panic spread like fire. They pointed rifles in every direction, but the jungle was too thick, too quiet. The traps had confused their sensors. Then, from the trees, Gore struck. He didn't roar. He didn't scream. He moved like a shadow with claws. One soldier went flying into a tree. Another had his weapon crushed in Gore's hand before he could even aim. The third tried to run, only to fall into a pit trap lined with sharpened metal. Jack watched from above, heart steady. They thought this was a hunt, he muttered, but they walked into a war. It was over in 3 minutes. 3 dead, 2 captured, 1 unconscious. Jack stepped out of the brush, calm and controlled. The 2 captured soldiers looked up, bloodied and dazed. Jack Riker. One of them gasped. You're alive. Jack knelt beside them. Very. We had orders. You were a threat. We were told to erase any trace of you. Erase me. Jack chuckled bitterly. You tried. You failed. He stood and looked toward the trees. Gore emerged from the shadows, tall and still, blood dripping from his claws. He stopped beside Jack, silent, loyal, terrifying. The soldiers stared in horror. "What is that thing?" one whispered. Jack didn't answer. He simply raised his communicator and connected it to the fallen soldier's satellite link. He began recording. "This is Jack Riker, formerly lieutenant of Earth Force Command." Behind him, Gore loomed like a living nightmare. "You left me to die on a hostile world. You called me a traitor. You gave me no trial, no proof, no chance to fight back. You sent me here to vanish." He stepped forward, voice cold. "But I didn't vanish. I survived. I adapted." He placed a hand on Gore's arm. "And I made an ally you'll never control. You made a monster and feared it. You locked it away. But he chose to protect me, not you." He stared into the camera. "I'm not coming back for revenge. I'm coming back for justice." He ended the recording. Then, with the press of a button, he sent the signal. The message bounced off the soldier's comm satellite, up into orbit, and from there, to Earth, to every military channel, every intelligence division, every news outlet that still monitored Jack Riker's name. It was out there now. Unstoppable. Jack turned to Gore. "They'll come harder next time." Gore growled softly. "They'll send teams, bombers, maybe even orbital strikes." Gore stood still, unafraid. Jack nodded. "We'll be ready." Over the next 3 days, they moved camp to the ruins of the old research facility. Jack rebuilt the comm tower there, upgraded the shield generator, rewired power systems. He found old blueprints, schematics for Gore's kind, weak points, strengths, design logs. Some were horrifying. Notes about chemical punishment, brain control devices, pain feedback systems. Jack felt sick reading it all. "They tried to break you," he said to Gore, "but they never understood you were more than a weapon." He burned the files. From now on, Gore's story would not be written by scientists. It would be written by choice. At night, Jack stood on the roof of the facility and looked at the stars. One star blinked differently than the others. Moving. A ship. Not here yet, but close. He tightened his grip on the railing. "They're coming." Gore joined him quietly. They stood together, man and monster, staring at the sky. Jack spoke softly. "When I fell here, I was broken, angry, alone." He looked up at his companion. "But now, I'm something else. And so are you." He turned to the jungle behind him, full of traps, weapons, secrets. "Let them come." Return of the Banished. The sky burned. Flames split the clouds as 3 Earth military dropships roared into the atmosphere, engines howling like beasts. Their sleek black forms cut through the green skies of planet 501Z, heading straight toward the jungle below. Inside the lead ship, Commander Talon gripped the railing tightly. "Full assault formation," he barked. "Remember, we're not here to negotiate. Jack Riker is considered rogue, and that creature with him is a classified asset." He paused, voice hardening. "Eliminate both." Down on the surface, Jack stood on top of the old research facility, staring at the glowing dots in the sky. "They didn't waste time," he said. Beside him, Gore crouched low, silent and still. His muscles were tense, eyes locked on the ships descending like angry gods. Jack didn't flinch. He tapped his communicator. "Gore, it's time." With a silent nod, Gore vanished into the trees. Jack moved quickly to the facility's command room. He checked the trap network, active. The shield field, online. The defensive turrets, repaired and waiting. Then he opened the underground door. The vault. Inside were crates of weapons taken from the old wrecks. Blasters, mines, EMP darts, all salvage, repaired, deadly. He armed himself. This time, he wasn't surviving. He was fighting back. The dropships landed like thunder, flattening trees and throwing dust into the air. Troops poured out, dozens of elite soldiers in full battle armor. Their boots shook the earth. Their visors glowed red in the shadows. They moved in squads, weapons raised. Visuals on the facility. One soldier said through his comm, "No movement." Commander Talon stepped forward. "He's here. He wants us to see him." He wasn't wrong. Suddenly, a loudspeaker crackled to life. Jack's voice echoed through the jungle. "Welcome back." There was a pause. "Let's see what you learned since you left me to die." Boom. The first trap exploded, a concussive mine that knocked back the lead squad. Vines snapped as dart traps released, striking armor and disabling comlinks. Chaos erupted. And then came Gore. He dropped from the trees like a silent meteor. One swipe. 2 soldiers down. A second strike. Rifles broken in half. He moved like water, like smoke, like something no human had ever trained to fight. Blasters fired wildly. Bullets bounced off trees. Screams echoed as Gore leaped between shadows, using the jungle as his weapon. Jack moved on the other side, striking with speed and purpose. He disabled targets with precision, using flashbangs and shock rounds. He never wasted a bullet. Together, they were untouchable. The Earth Army had technology. But Jack and Gore had something else. Trust. In the command ship, Commander Talon growled, "Deploy the mechs." 2 large drop pods slammed into the jungle floor. They opened with a hiss. Out stepped 2 giant combat mechs, 10 feet tall, bristling with weapons, glowing with power. "This ends now," Talon said. Gore saw the mechs first. He didn't run. He charged. One mech opened fire, lighting up the trees. Gore took hits, but kept moving, leaping high and slamming into the machine's chest. His claws tore into metal, ripping apart wires and smashing sensors. The second mech aimed at him, but Jack appeared from behind, launching an EMP dart straight into its control core. Boom! It sparked, froze, and collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. Gore tore the other in half. The battlefield fell silent. Only one man remained. Commander Talon stood with a pulse rifle, his armor shining. "You should have stayed buried, Riker," he growled. Jack walked forward slowly. "I didn't crawl out of the grave just to stop here." They faced each other. Then Talon smirked. "You think that thing cares about you? It's a freak. A tool." Jack didn't speak. Gore stepped out of the trees behind him. Talon raised his rifle. "Let's test it." He fired. Straight at Jack. But the bullet never hit. Because Gore jumped in front of him. The round slammed into Gore's shoulder. He didn't fall. He roared. The kind of roar that cracked the sky. And he charged. Commander Talon never stood a chance. Later, as the dust settled and the fires died, Jack knelt beside Gore. The wound wasn't fatal, but it was deep. "You didn't have to do that," Jack whispered. Gore looked at him, blood dripping from his fur. And for the first time, he made a sound, soft, deep, and full of meaning. Not a growl, not a roar, a word, barely a whisper. "Brother." Jack froze. Emotion filled his eyes. "You spoke." Gore closed his eyes and rested. Jack looked to the stars again. He had survived the exile. He had faced the army. He had returned. But now the galaxy had to decide what he truly was. A threat, a rebel, or a symbol of something stronger. A man with nothing left to lose, except the one creature that chose to fight beside him. Hero or threat? The transport ship glided through space like a silent ghost. It wasn't military. It wasn't clean. It had scorch marks, patched metal, and hand-welded repairs along its hull. It was built from parts of wreckage, old tech from fallen drones, disabled Earth Force mechs, and scavenged enemy vessels. At its helm stood Jack Riker. Beside him, in a reinforced chamber filled with silence and shadows, sat Gore. He was healing. The wound from the bullet had closed, But deep inside, something had changed. He had spoken. He had chosen. And now, they were going back. Jack looked out at the blue-green orb ahead. Earth. Once his home. Once his battlefield. Once his grave. Now, he was returning not to ask for forgiveness, but to ask the world a question. What happens when the man you left behind becomes more than human? News of Jack's survival had already reached Earth. The signal he sent had gone viral. Millions had watched the footage. The jungle warfare. The traps. The soldiers defeated. And the monster that followed only him. Some people cheered. Others were terrified. Debates flooded the networks. He's a hero. He's dangerous. He controls a killing machine. He's the only one that survived the Terra Tamer project. Doesn't that mean something? He must be stopped before he brings that thing to Earth. But nothing could stop them now. Jack and Gore had already landed. They didn't enter Earth's atmosphere in secret. They arrived in the open, on live broadcast, in the center of the Galactic Assembly's landing zone, just outside New Geneva. Hundreds of soldiers stood waiting. Armored. Nervous. Civilians watched from behind force fields, holding signs. Welcome home, Jack. Monsters don't belong here. Forgive the forgotten. Don't trust the beast. The ship's ramp hissed open. And Jack stepped out, unarmed. Behind him, Gore followed. Slow, massive, his fur swaying in the wind, his glowing eyes watching the crowd. His arm was bandaged, his chest scarred, but he walked without fear. The soldiers raised their weapons. Hold your fire, a voice commanded. It was Admiral Tessa Varn, one of the highest-ranking officers in Earth Command, a woman known for logic, not emotion. She stepped forward. Jack Riker, you were presumed dead. You were marked as a traitor. Jack stared at her. I know. You attacked Earth soldiers. You stole military tech. I defended myself. You arrived here with a genetically modified war beast created in a black site facility. Jack turned slightly. He arrived with me. Varn paused. Why return? Jack's voice was calm, steady. I came to show you what your system created, and what it could never control. He stepped closer. You called him a threat. You tried to break him. But Gore isn't a weapon. He's a person. He chose to save me, not because of programming, not because of pain, but because I treated him with respect. The crowd was silent. Jack raised his voice. Your soldiers had orders to kill us, but they failed, not because of firepower, but because we had trust, unity, purpose. He looked around, his voice low but powerful. You call us monsters, but monsters don't protect the weak. They don't spare enemies. They don't sacrifice themselves. He looked back at Gore. They don't say brother. The air was heavy. No one moved. Then, someone clapped. One person in the crowd, then another, then more. A slow wave of applause grew across the crowd, but not everyone clapped. In the shadows of the assembly, old men in suits whispered to each other. Generals tightened their jaws. Scientists watched Gore with nervous eyes. Admiral Varn raised her hand. The noise stopped. Jack, she said slowly, you've proven something. Rare. But you must understand, this changes everything. I know, Jack said. She looked at Gore, then back to Jack. What do you want? Jack looked her in the eye. I want freedom. For me. For him. No more cages. No more lies. Varn nodded slowly. And if someone tries to take that away? Jack didn't smile. Didn't threaten. He simply said, then they'll learn what real monsters look like. 3 months later, Jack and Gore disappeared from Earth again. They didn't stay in the cities. They didn't take power. They left. Some say they went to help on war-torn colonies, protecting the innocent. Some say they roamed from world to world, hunting those who built monsters and left them to rot. Some say they're building a new home, a sanctuary for others like Gore. Forgotten, broken, powerful, loyal. Legends call Jack Riker a soldier, a traitor, a survivor. But those who met him, those who fought him, they call him something else. The man who taught the monster to choose.